There's a moment I keep coming back to. It was 2021. Meghan Markle sat down with Oprah Winfrey in front of 17 million people and said everything. Every grievance, every wound, every name. It was raw. It was dramatic. It was impossible to look away from. The world stopped. Social media exploded. Think pieces were written. Sides were taken. And Kate? Kate showed up 3 days later at a school event in a green coat, smiled at children, said nothing, went home. That's the whole video right there. Except, it isn't. Because what happened in the months and years after that moment is one of the most quietly fascinating case studies in public image I have ever watched unfold in real time. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. We are told that in today's world, you have to be loud to be relevant. You have to explain yourself, promote yourself, defend yourself. You have to have a podcast, a newsletter, a brand deal, an Instagram caption with layers of meaning. You have to show people who you are, constantly, urgently, exhaustingly, or they will forget you. Meghan believed that, or at least, she acted like she did. Kate never did. And here's the thing that nobody seems to want to say out loud. It worked. Not just a little, completely, overwhelmingly. In a way that becomes more obvious every single year that passes. This video is not about who is a better person. I'm not here to put anyone on trial. What I'm interested in is something far more specific, and honestly, far more useful to anyone watching this. I want to look at the mechanics of Kate's approach, the pattern underneath the silence. Because I don't think it was accidental. I don't think Kate Middleton stumbled into relevance by doing nothing. I think she understood something that most people, most brands, most public figures, most of us, get completely wrong. Invisibility, deployed correctly, is not weakness. It is the most sophisticated form of control there is. Stay with me. Let's go back to 2018, because that's where this story really begins. Harry and Meghan had just gotten engaged, and the media was electric with it. Meghan was new, she was glamorous, she was American, she was unlike anything the royal family had seen before. The public was fascinated. And in that fascination, something shifted. For the first time, Kate Middleton, who had been the undisputed center of royal attention for nearly a decade, was no longer the most interesting woman in the room. Now here's the question. What do you do when someone else walks in and takes your spotlight? Most people, most of us, if we're honest, would try to reclaim it. Post more, appear more, remind people why we matter. There's a panic that sets in when attention moves away from us, and that panic usually makes us louder. Kate went quieter. Not invisible, quieter. She kept showing up. She kept doing the work. She attended the engagements. She visited the hospitals. She sat with the school children. She stood next to William at the ceremonies. But she stopped competing for the frame. She didn't give interviews angling for sympathy. She didn't brief journalists. She didn't position herself against Meghan in any visible way whatsoever. At the time, a lot of people read this as passivity, as someone who had been overshadowed and didn't know how to fight back. Some were almost sorry for her. They were misreading it entirely. What Kate was doing, whether consciously or through deeply ingrained instinct, and I suspect it was both, was refusing to enter a game she knew she couldn't win on those terms. Meghan was better at that game. More expressive, more openly emotional, more willing to share. If Kate had tried to out Meghan, she would have lost. She would have looked like a pale imitation of something more vivid. So she didn't play. And this is the first pillar of what I'm calling the invisible strategy. Know which game not to enter. If you have ever worked in a competitive environment, an office, a creative field, a social circle, you know this feeling. Someone arrives who is louder, flashier, more willing to self-promote, and the instinct is to match them, to turn up your own volume. But there's another option, and it's the one most people overlook. Just keep doing the thing you do, at the level you do it, without acknowledging the competition at all. It's psychologically very hard, but when it works in a way that loud never quite manages. Because loud gets tiring, consistent never does. By 2019, the contrast between the two women was becoming impossible to ignore, but not in the way the tabloids were framing it. Yes, There were the stories about tension, about crying, about a falling out over a bridesmaid dress. And Meghan, through representatives and later directly, responded to those stories. Clarified, corrected, pushed back. Which is completely understandable. Who wouldn't? If someone is telling a false story about you, the instinct to correct the record is overwhelming. But every response, however justified, kept Meghan inside the story. And Kate, who was also being written about, who was also being watched and speculated over, said nothing. Did nothing to address any of it publicly. Just kept appearing, kept smiling, kept working. And here is something counterintuitive that I want you to sit with for a moment. When you don't respond to a story, you don't confirm it. But you also don't amplify it. The story needs oxygen to live. Silence is the withdrawal of oxygen. It is not the same as admitting defeat. It is the refusal to let someone else's narrative become your defining moment. Kate seemed to understand this at a cellular level. Now let's talk about 2020 and 2021, because this is where the pattern becomes impossible to deny. Meghan and Harry left. The interview happened. And for a brief, dizzying moment, it looked like Kate was in an impossible position. She had been named, not explicitly accused of anything terrible, but she was in the story. The crying incident, the suggestion of coldness. Millions of people were now looking at her differently, waiting to see what she would do. What did she do? She went to a rugby event. She laughed with the crowd. She wore a blue coat. And I know how that sounds. It sounds almost ridiculous. It sounds like avoidance, like privilege, like someone who simply didn't have to address anything because the institution would protect her. And that critique exists, and it's worth acknowledging. But here's what I keep noticing. It worked. Not just institutionally, personally. The wave of sympathy that might have been redirected at Kate never quite solidified into anything. Because she gave people nothing to anchor it to. She didn't perform victimhood. She didn't perform defiance. She just kept being, consistently, recognizably, reliably, herself. And in the chaos of that moment, when everything felt unstable and dramatic and loud, Kate's consistency felt like an anchor. Not exciting, but deeply, deeply reassuring. This is the second pillar. In a world of noise, stillness becomes remarkable. Think about the last time you were in a genuinely chaotic situation, at work, in a relationship, in a group of friends falling apart. Think about the person who didn't spiral, who didn't add to the noise, who just stayed steady. Do you remember how magnetic that felt? How you found yourself gravitating toward them almost without meaning to? That is what Kate was doing on a global scale. And the public felt it, even when they couldn't name it. The approval ratings didn't spike dramatically. They didn't need to. They just stayed high, quietly, steadily, while everything around her fluctuated wildly. If you find this kind of analysis useful, if you like the idea of actually understanding what's happening beneath the surface of these stories rather than just reacting to headlines, then hitting subscribe would mean a lot. This is exactly the kind of content I make here, because the royals, whatever you think of them, are a masterclass in human behavior, and there's so much more to unpack. But first, we're not done with Kate's strategy. Because what happened next, what happened when her own world became genuinely, privately devastating, is the most important part of this story. And it's coming up right now. There's a concept in psychology called costly signaling. The idea is simple. The more something costs you to demonstrate, the more believable it is. Words are cheap. Showing up when it's hard, that's expensive. And expensive signals are the ones that actually land. Kate has never talked about her discipline. Never explained it, never packaged it into a brand, never gave an interview where she described her philosophy on public life. But she has demonstrated it, over and over, at significant personal cost, in front of the entire world. And that demonstration is worth 1,000 interviews. Let me explain what I mean. There's a version of public image management that is essentially performance. You craft a narrative, you release it through controlled channels, you make sure the right journalists get the right quotes. It can work, for a while. But the audience is not stupid. Over time, people develop a sensitivity to performed authenticity. They can't always name it, but they feel it. Something slightly off. A gap between what someone says they are and what they actually seem to be when the cameras catch them off guard. Meghan's public image has always been, and I say this descriptively, not critically, heavily constructed. There is nothing wrong with that. Most public figures construct their image deliberately, but when the construction is visible, when people can see the machinery, it creates a kind of ambient skepticism, even among people who like her, even among her supporters. There's always a slight question. Is this the real her, or the version we're supposed to see? Kate's image, paradoxically, has always felt less constructed, precisely because she has refused to construct it openly. She has never told us who she has just been it, repeatedly, in public, without commentary. And because there's no official narrative to push back against, there's nothing to be skeptical of. This is the third pillar. The absence of explanation creates the impression of nothing to explain. It's a subtle thing, almost invisible, which is, of course, exactly the point. Now, and I want to be careful here because this is the part of the story that deserves to be handled with some weight. Let's talk about 2023 and 2024. Because everything I've described so far could theoretically be attributed to strategy, to training, to institutional support, to privilege. You could argue that it's easy to be quiet when you have nothing to lose. That Kate's silence was comfortable because the machine was always protecting her. And then she got cancer, and the silence continued. In January 2024, Kate disappeared from public life. No explanation was given beyond a planned abdominal surgery. The speculation was immediate and intense. This is the internet. There was going to be speculation regardless of what the palace said. But what the palace said was, nothing much. She's recovering. She'll return when she's ready. Weeks passed, then months. The theories multiplied. The photos appeared, a grainy, edited image that became its own international news story. And still, Kate said nothing. Until she was ready. Until she sat down, quietly, and filmed herself in a garden, and told the world she had cancer, and asked for privacy while she healed. No drama. No revenge narrative. No attempt to control the conspiracy theories by engaging with them. Just, here is the truth. I wasn't ready to share it before. I'm sharing it now. The response was extraordinary. Not just sympathy, though there was enormous sympathy, but something deeper than that. A kind of collective exhale. A reminder of what it feels like when someone simply tells you the truth without packaging it, without a PR team visible in every sentence, without an agenda attached to the vulnerability. People who had spent months speculating, criticizing, theorizing, many of them felt something close to shame. Not because they had done anything uniquely wrong, but because Kate's straightforwardness made the noise around her feel suddenly very small. And here is what I think is the most important thing about that moment, and the thing that brings together everything we've been talking about. Kate had spent 6 years building an account of credibility through consistent, unspectacular behavior. She had made no grand promises about who she was. She had simply shown up, stayed quiet, done the work. And when the genuinely hard moment came, not the PR hard moment, the actually hard moment, the terrifying, life-altering hard moment, she handled it in exactly the same way. There was no gap between the brand and the person, because there was no brand, just a person. And that is almost impossible to fake. You cannot manufacture it at the moment you need it. You have to have been building it, quietly, for years, long before anyone knew it would matter. This is the fourth pillar, and the deepest one. Credibility is not built in the moment of crisis. It is built in all the ordinary moments before it. Think about the people in your life you trust most deeply. Not the ones who have made the biggest declarations of loyalty, the ones who have shown up, quietly, consistently, over time, without needing to be thanked for it. The ones who were the same person in the small moments as they were in the big ones. That consistency is what Kate had been building, publicly, for over a decade. And when 2024 came, she had more than enough of it to draw from. Meghan, whatever her strengths, had spent the same years in a very different kind of accumulation. Stories, interviews, revelations, each one resetting the narrative, each one requiring the audience to update their understanding of who she was. That's exhausting for an audience. It requires constant re-engagement, and over time, not all at once, but gradually, a portion of that audience stops re-engaging. Not out of malice, out of fatigue. Kate never asked that of her audience. She never asked them to keep up. She just kept going, and they kept watching. If you've made it this far, I genuinely want to know what you think. Because the question this raises, the one I find myself sitting with, is not really about Kate or Meghan at all. It's about something we all navigate every single day. And that's what's coming in the final part of this video. Here is the question I want to leave you with. And I mean this genuinely. I'm not setting up a neat conclusion. I'm asking something I don't fully have the answer to myself. We live in a culture that rewards explanation, that treats silence as suspicious, that reads the absence of a personal brand as either arrogance or emptiness. We are told, constantly, that if you don't tell your own story, someone else will tell it for you, and they'll get it wrong. So you'd better get out there. You'd better be visible. You'd better make sure people understand you. And yet, here is a woman who, by every measurable standard, did the opposite of that. Who let other people tell stories about her, wrong ones, sometimes cruel ones, and said nothing. Who absorbed years of being called boring, being called a doormat, being called overshadowed. Who never released a statement explaining her inner life, never gave a sit-down interview detailing her struggles, never once appeared to need the audience to understand her. And she became, quietly, one of the most beloved public figures in the world. Not universally, nothing is universal, but broadly, durably, in a way that has only deepened over time rather than fluctuating with each news cycle. So what does that mean for the rest of us? I think it means this: the need to be understood, right now, immediately, by everyone, is one of the most expensive needs a person can have. It costs you energy. It costs you time. It costs you the kind of focused, consistent effort that actually builds something lasting. Every time you stop to explain yourself to someone who has already decided what they think, you are spending a resource you could have put toward the work itself. Kate, whether she ever articulated it this way or not, seems to have made a different calculation. She decided, at some point, perhaps very early on, that the work would speak, that the presence would accumulate, that the record, over time, would be louder than any single statement she could make in any single moment. And here is the uncomfortable part, the part that I think is actually the most important thing in this entire video. That calculation is only available to you if you believe, genuinely and deeply, that the work is worth doing regardless of whether anyone is watching. You cannot fake consistency. You cannot perform discipline. You cannot manufacture the kind of quiet confidence that makes silence look like strength rather than absence, not for long, and not convincingly. Which means that what Kate has built is not really a strategy at all. It's a character. And character is the one thing in public life, in any life, that cannot be launched, rebranded, or explained into existence. It can only be accumulated, slowly, quietly, in thousands of ordinary moments that no one is paying particular attention to, until suddenly, everyone is. There's something almost old-fashioned about it. In an era of personal branding and curated vulnerability and strategic oversharing, the idea that you could simply do your job, keep your private life private, and let time do the work, it sounds almost naive. Until you look at the results. I'm not saying Meghan was wrong to speak. I want to be clear about that. Her decision to tell her story on her own terms, in her own words, came from a real place. The experiences she described were real. The pain was real. Nobody should be required to suffer in silence. That is not the lesson here. The lesson, if there is one, is narrower than that. It's about the difference between speaking because you need to be understood and speaking because you have something to say. The first comes from anxiety. The second comes from security. And audiences, all of us, watching, reading, scrolling, can feel the difference even when we can't name it. Kate, at her best, has always felt like the second. Someone who is not performing certainty, but who simply has it. Who doesn't need the camera to validate the moment. Who would have shown up to that school event, smiled at those children, and meant it, whether the cameras were there or not. That is a remarkably rare thing. And I think, on some level below conscious thought, below the headlines and the fashion commentary and the royal gossip, that is exactly what people are responding to when they say they love her. Not the outfits, not the protocol, not even the resilience, though that matters. The sense that she is exactly who she appears to be. In 2026, that might be the most extraordinary thing a public figure can offer. So I'll ask you directly because I genuinely want to know what you think. Do you believe silence can be a strategy? Or does it only work if it's not a strategy at all? If it's just who you are? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and this is exactly the kind of question where I expect to completely disagree with half of you, and I'm here for it. If this video made you think, even if it made you think I'm wrong, a like genuinely helps this kind of content reach people who would never search for it, but would find it useful. And if you're new here, this is what this channel is. Not gossip, not takes, just the thing underneath the thing. I'll see you in the next one.